Mixtape Stories, where science fiction, humor, the search for meaning, and Gen X nostalgia meet. Let's be honest, the present is overrated. Rage-fueled social media, the death of our favorite artists, Crocs. So, when Chris discovers a time travel music app powered by nostalgia, he ditches our current dystopia and shimmers to the 1970s to create a better future for himself in the past. Using his knowledge to invest in little startups like Apple Computers and Microsoft, Chris will find there's more to upending the time-space continuum than getting rich, something more personal. Find out what that is in the 6-episode miniseries Smells Like Time Travel by Michael Juge.
I didn't expect to find anything of value in Mom's house. Certainly not anything that would obliterate my understanding of causality, time, and the role of the consciousness in it. Then again, my mom collected a lot of crap in her day. I never would have even discovered it had it not been for the purge. The drive to New Orleans from Austin was never particularly enjoyable.
In fact, Lonely Planet rated it as one of America's greatest soul-sucking road trips. But at least I made good time, as I pulled on to good old Ostrich Lane in under 8 hours.
Mom's house was easy to distinguish from the others in Lake Vista. It was the lone ramshackle in an otherwise pristine neighborhood, the last remaining house on Ostrich Lane that hadn't been demolished after the floodwaters of Hurricane Katrina brined every other house years earlier. I parked along the street and stepped into the massive puddle that had been a permanent feature at the base of Mom's driveway since 1982. I think the National Geographic Society could refer to the puddle as a proper body of water by now. I grabbed the coffees and sloshed through the puddle and up the driveway. Mom's house. Jesus, what a sight. Coated in a layer of algae, I couldn't honestly refer to it as a red brick house anymore. The lawn had reverted to a state of nature, giving the place a sort of Walking Dead kind of ambiance. The aluminum gutters sagged with bushels sprouting out. A U-Haul truck was parked on the crumbling driveway. I entered the house through the sunroom and was assaulted by the stench of black mold. The room was packed with rickety plastic shelves holding random tchotchkes, a busted chifforobe over there, and a leather couch that no longer belonged in polite society. "Hello?" I called out.
"Morning, Chris,"
Heidi greeted from the kitchen. With the coffees in hand, I snaked out of the sunroom, past the living room, and into the kitchen to find her packing the good china from the high cupboard. Heidi stopped what she was doing and gave me a hug.
"Wow, you got here early."
She and I were both brunette, but somehow she made it look exotic. What made us identifiable as siblings was our brown, almond-shaped eyes, which we got from our mom. Heidi resembled her a lot, actually, but like a taller, happier version of her.
"How was your drive?"
I don't know, I think we could do without Baton Rouge, don't you?
"Well, why don't you go back to my house and relax? You must be tired."
That was just like my sister, always looking out for her baby brother. Heidi rented the U-Haul and got an early start, not to mention everything else she already had to deal with, from getting the final account from Mom's debt collectors to finalizing the probate and preparing the house for sale. Yet she was trying to cut me some slack. "No, I'm good. I got myself a granita. Oh, and I got you a chai," I said, handing it to her. She smiled.
"With almond milk?"
"Is there any other kind?"
"You are the best brother, hands down."
That was categorically false, but I wasn't here to argue. With the demolition scheduled next week, Heidi and I had a lot of work to do. In short order, we would have to sort out what was sellable, what was donatable, what was valuable to us, and what was just plain junk. And there was just so much junk. Ornaments from Big Lots, self-help lectures on VHS, water purifying filters that fit a defunct product line. We began the purge with the no-brainer items like the plastic chairs and Mardi Gras cups that Mom collected during her hoarding years. But after that, the task became much more difficult. Family photos fused together, letters from summer camp now illegible, a secretary that had been in our family for generations, rotting in the living room. They all held so many memories, but the flood damage was just too severe to justify keeping. In Mom's bedroom, on the dresser were dozens of political protest pens that spanned generations. Everything from Make Love Not War and No Nukes to No Blood for Oil. In the far corner, in a little tan heap, was her corduroy jacket. I remember her wearing that as far back as the time when she and Dad took Heidi and me to see Time Bandits. I picked it up, trying to remember the last time I saw her wearing it. It was before the Lewy body dementia took over, before she went into the memory care facility. God, the way she looked at the end. Let it go, Chris. I put the corduroy jacket and pins in a box and moved on. I was in the dining room, rummaging through the vinyl, most of which, thankfully, hadn't been damaged in the flood. I put on the Flashdance soundtrack and waded waist-deep in memory while thumbing through the LPs. It was an incredible collection. Everything from Jim Croce to Duran Duran to Johnny Cash. She played the Beatles incessantly, as well as Blondie, Talking Heads, and Marvin Gaye. And of course, the Flashdance soundtrack.
Hey, Chris, does this look familiar to you?
She was holding a fireproof safety chest that was covered in dried up grime, meaning it had been in the house a long time. I shook my head. It doesn't ring a bell.
Well, whatever it is, it's for you. I found it inside a cubbyhole behind your dresser.
Heidi plopped the safety chest onto a plastic table that Mom purchased at a Things and Shit. Written in permanent marker, it instructed, "For Chris, do not open until 2016. The handwriting looked to be Mom's.
Okay, do you want to bet that it's original Exxon stock certificates or that it's Nazi gold?
She wagered, as she handed me the key that was taped onto the bottom. Right. Whatever assets Mom once owned had long since been swindled away. Regardless, there was something in there that Mom left for me long ago. I thought about what could be inside. Photos untouched by the flood? A letter from Mom written long ago? Maybe a mixtape she made for me? I opened up the chest and found a magazine. All that buildup, and this is what she left me. A stupid old magazine.
What's Omni?
Heidi asked. It's a science and technology meets sci-fi kind of magazine. I remember Mom buying me an issue whenever we went to the mall. While Heidi went over into Benetton, I'd loiter over at B. Dalton, where I'd delve into each new issue of Omni to read articles on the newest tech coming out and sci-fi short stories. I suppose this might have been one of those purchases.
So, where's the stack of cash?
This is it, sis. See for yourself. The wave of despair I suddenly felt was unexpected. I didn't realize how much I really wanted to touch something of Mom that wasn't tainted by the dementia, and that would give me closure. But there was going to be no closure. Sometimes things just end. I shut the lid with the magazine inside and pocketed the key. It took almost an entire week, but we retrieved what we felt we needed from the house. 20 Ostrich Lane was ready to be leveled. After loading the last items into the U-Haul truck, I handed Heidi the box with Mom's corduroy jacket and pins. Her eyes welled up. "Go on, it's yours." She pulled it out of the box, took a deep whiff, and broke down. It occurred to me that the only thing left untarnished by the disease was Mom's corduroy jacket. And if anyone deserved closure, it was Heidi. We hugged and I saw her off, the U-Haul making a wake in the puddle as it lumbered onto the street. I was alone with the house now. Every fiber of my overly sentimental id wanted me to take one last walkthrough, one last moment with Mom's house, with all of its joy and sorrow, because this was it. Tomorrow, the demolition company was going to render the gravimetric center of my childhood to nothing. There would be no returning home again. Instead, I got into my beat-up Camry and drove back to Austin. In the trunk was the Omni magazine, the artifact that would change everything. I hadn't had much time to give much thought to the seemingly worthless publication that Mom left for me, as my immediate concern upon returning to Austin was my tenuous future at Trollster. They hired me to develop an application for its biggest client, Conway Energy. Yeah, that Conway Energy. The largest energy broker and telecom in the world, who pretty much own the internet. Conway MCI, Conway Amazon, Conway Twitter, Conway Google. I don't think there was any facet of daily life that Conway Energy didn't have a hand in one way or another. They wanted an application that would retrieve and analyze employees' social media and direct messages. I nearly created something similar back in the early 2000s while contracting for the NSA to collect and analyze email traffic. I was really close to finishing it too when I had a nervous breakdown. My mom said it was my consciousness reacting to what I created. Of course, Mom said a lot of things, like blaming Mercury retrograde whenever the toaster went on the fritz. After I left the project, I got my marbles back, and then spent the next several years bouncing from job to job. I really didn't like what Trollster wanted me to build, but by the time they hired me, I was drowning in credit card debt, so I didn't really have much of a choice. However, I ended up questioning the morality of their entire mission just before leaving for Mom's house. When I returned, I was pulled from the team lead position. After a long day of recreating that abomination of a program, I drove back to my apartment in the exurb of Pflugerville. It's a town famous for being 20 miles away from Austin. Perched up on a hill, my one-bedroom apartment had a commanding view of the Best Buy and Target across the highway. I plopped down into the IKEA Slacker lounge chair and stared listlessly at the traffic in the parking lot. "Alexis, play Spotify," I commanded to the one thing I had control over. Spotify, which was also owned by Conway, pulled up "I Am Allowed." Buffalo Tom brought me back to the salad days of the 1990s, to when I first moved to Austin, back when anything was possible. But now, this was my life. Middle-aged, sitting alone in my one-bedroom rental, teetering on economic ruin, and judging the parking ability of others, while entropy led inexorably to a cold death to the universe. It was thoughts like these that kept Big Pharma in business. I swiveled around and saw the stack of stuff from Mom's house sitting on the dining room table. Next to the milk crates containing all the vinyl was the safety chest with Mom's bizarre instructions. For Chris, do not open until 2016. Oh, Mom, you crazy old bat. I opened the chest and pulled out the November 1984 issue of Omni. Lord knew what she was thinking when she put it in there. I thumbed through the magazine to get a chuckle at some of the old ads, and I turned to the page that Mom dog-eared. The title read, "The Future Isn't What It Used to Be. Interview with Christian Vaughn." Catchy title. The article's introduction described Christian Vaughn as an enormously successful venture capitalist, who along with his business partner Jasmine Bartels got their start as angel investors in Apple Computers and had since become the premier venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. But the interview focused on his newest project, a science fiction novel set in the 21st century. I expected he'd had flying cars and off-world colonies, or conversely it would be some post-nuclear war trope. But to my surprise, Chris Vaughn had a completely unique take on the future. Entitled Troll, the novel's premise was that in the year 2019, everyone owned these things called pads, which allowed people to share videos, news feeds, and their opinions through a thing called the interweb on platforms called SONETs. Unfortunately, this marvelous suite of technology intended to inform and connect people around the globe wound up having the opposite effect. Well-sourced journalism became subsumed by concocted news stories, while peer-reviewed scientific research was replaced by celebrity opinions. And far from connecting people from around the globe, it only further balkanized people as the platforms turned self-righteous outrage into a commodity. Talk about spot on. I saw how social media was getting worse by the month, especially with this being an election year, and that wild curveball Trump running in the primary. I mean, we all know that Jeb Bush will end up becoming the nominee, but still. The social media sphere was getting insane, with more conspiracy theories and culture war flashpoints. Though published 32 years ago, the novel setting in the 2010s seemed to capture our world today perfectly. So much so, I found it a little bit unsettling. Apparently, critics didn't care for what we became. The journalist interviewing Vaughn quoted the New York Times review of Troll as a stunningly unrealistic vision of the future. Heavy Metal said it was the most boring dystopian tale ever. I turned the page, and that's when I saw it. The thing that changed everything. The photograph of Christian Vaughn from the interview in 1984. He was me. Me? How could the photo be me? I was 12 years old in 1984, so it couldn't be me. But staring right back at me was a mug I was all too familiar with. That stupid recessive chin and my mom's almond-shaped eyes, right down to the scar on the nose. Christian Vaughn was not some long-lost uncle or some random doppelganger caused by DNA's lack of imagination. Chris was me, as I was now, but in 1984. I noticed something else in the photo. Chris Vaughn, me, whoever, was wearing a t-shirt with www.mcflavian.com printed across the chest. Just to be clear, there was no such thing as a .com in 1984. I grabbed my laptop and clicked onto Conway Google, the crooked G as the kids call it. Google didn't have anything on McFlavian, outside of some Irish Twitter accounts. So, I typed mcflavian.com into the address bar, which brought me to a very basic website containing a single blog entry dated October 25th, 1999. It read, Chris, the coding is almost complete. All that's left are the bridge commands. Click on the Shimmer button at the bottom. Once you download the app onto that iPhone of yours, pick a song that will evoke your nostalgia and you should be shimmering over to us. Sincerely, CK. Alright, who in the hell was CK? Who was McFlyvian, for that matter? The blog was clearly directed to Chris Vaughn. Or maybe to me? That's the problem with common names. But I didn't ever recall doing any work for something called McFlyvian. The blog was posted in 1999. Back then I was just a courier. I needed a moment to process all of this because none of it made any sense. I was holding a magazine from 1984 with a photo of me as the middle-aged mope I was now. And I was staring at a blog post from 1999 instructing me to download the coding to an app for a device that wouldn't exist until something like 2007. Just below CK's blog message was a hyperlink containing a PDF file entitled, "So You Want a Shimmer, the Shimmer Pro Instruction Manual." A table of contents was followed by an introductory preamble. Welcome to the Shimmer Pro app by McFlyvian. Have you ever heard a song that takes you back? Well, thanks to McFlyvian's nostalgic resonance processing technology, when you play a song in Shimmer Pro, any song that evokes nostalgia will take you back. Literally. How does the Shimmer Pro app work? Consciousness is an emergent quality, not bound by the entropic process of thermodynamics, meaning our consciousness can travel back upon itself. When we feel nostalgic, our consciousness is partially re-experiencing a moment in the past. In essence, a part of our consciousness is traveling back in time. Music is one of the most powerful prompts of nostalgia. It went on like this, reading like the rules to an overly complicated board game re-gifted from a white elephant. So I skipped over to the frequently asked questions. Here's what I gathered. Shimmer Pro is a time-travel music app powered by nostalgia. I can go back in time as far as my nostalgia can take me with any song that evokes nostalgia, based on when I formed the nostalgia, not when the song was released. The songs I shimmer to need to be downloaded in order to work in the app. According to CK's note, once it was complete, they wanted me to download the app onto my iPhone and then shimmer over to them in 1999 because, I don't know, maybe because they didn't have such thing as an iPhone yet. But then, how did they know about such thing as an iPhone if it didn't exist yet? See, this is why Mom always told me never to time travel to strangers. But that didn't mean that I shouldn't complete the bridge commands to the app. I mean, what if it worked? Apparently it must have, because there I was in the Omni magazine interview. I scrolled down to the bottom of the website and clicked onto a button labeled Shimmer. I really hope that this wasn't some elaborate scheme to get me to download a virus, because I would feel like really stupid explaining this to uBreak-iFix. The web page was replaced by a black screen with cprompt text, populated with an insane amount of code. Most of it was beyond me, but all I had to do was create the bridge commands and transcribe it into the app developer. So, over the next several days, during the day, I worked on completing that abomination spyware application for Conway Energy. And by night, I created the bridge commands into the app developer. Once it was transcribed, I uploaded it into the App Store. After downloading the untested Shimmer Pro app onto my iPhone, I was in. The question now was, to when should I test this thing out? I figured I should shimmer to a time with a lot of nostalgic resonance just to make it easy. I needed a song to shimmer to, and Gin and Juice came to mind. I wasn't ever into Snoop Dogg, but I heard that song the other day on Spotify and I remembered getting all sentimental. Yeah, that's Gen X for you. So, I downloaded the song into iTunes, added it into the Shimmer playlist, along with Pretty Pimping, to serve as my home song to shimmer me back to the present. I sat down in the IKEA Slacker lounge chair, put my earbuds on, took a deep breath, and pressed Shimmer. At first, it was just like listening to any other song, but as soon as that funky-ass bass dropped, I noticed the walls started to ripple. To shimmer, actually. It reminded me of those old TV shows where a character talked about the past right before the scene changed to show it. Just as it hit its peak cacophony, the shimmering started to settle down. The walls of my apartment disappeared and were replaced by broad daylight. My chair buckled and I hit my ass on the ground. With a gust of wind, I was greeted with a face full of dust and gravel from a badly paved surface and was surrounded by several vehicles. I scuttled up from the ground, throwing off the Slacker chair as I stood. The base of the chair looked to have been sheared off. I tried to get my bearings. The cars, fortunately, weren't moving, and I didn't hear any engines running. I was in a parking lot. Parked alongside a Geo Metro were 3 identical-looking Oldsmobile Sierras, a Plymouth Breeze, and a Buick Century. Just then, some guy climbed out of a Chevy Nova.
Hey, Chris! The purple Breeze is already rented!
He indicated to the car beside me. I could barely make out what he was saying because the stereo in the car he was in was blasting Gin and Juice. The guy knew my name. Come to think of it, I recognized him too, vaguely. The surroundings of this parking lot started coalescing in my mind. The Buick Centuries and Sierras, they always broke down. I knew that because these were the vehicles I rented out over at Terminal Rental Car. Terminal Rental Car. It was my first employer when I moved to Austin 20 years ago. I showed up for an interview, and that guy, Ron was his name. He hired me on the spot. The next thing I knew, I was pushing out cars for the worst-rated car rental company in Texas. I heard the door from a double-wide office open, and out walked someone. I knew that lumpy gait of his. It was me. I bolted before other me could get a good look at me. I didn't want to create a paradox or whatever. Not on my first shimmer, anyway. I lunged over the hood of an Oldsmobile Sierra with the expert skill of a lonely middle-aged guy who talked about CrossFit too much. When I rounded the corner, I saw Robert Mueller Municipal Airport buzzing with activity. I pulled out my iPhone to get the exact date and time, but it said no service. What the hell? No service? How in the hell can there be no service? I jogged into the main terminal and down a small concourse, where I passed people waiting in line, dressed in slightly outdated attire. At the TWA check-in line, a guy was talking on his cell phone with the antenna extended. It reminded me of my first cell phone, which I didn't get until... And then it hit me why I didn't have cell service. I didn't have an account on this phone yet. How could Conway MCI provide cell service to my iPhone when I had no wireless account? The So You Want a Shimmer guide mentioned that my cell phone would not have wireless service further in the past, but that wasn't a problem. The app didn't require cell service as the songs were downloaded. Ahead were an array of TV monitors showing the arrivals with the date and time. February 27th, 1996. Oh my God! This was amazing! Oh, I gotta get a souvenir or something to bring back. 'Cause that's where my head goes, souvenirs. And then it occurred to me, Flipnotics. That used to be my favorite coffee house before they closed their doors a few years ago. I could head over there and buy a t-shirt. I pulled out my iPhone to summon a Lyft, and then I remembered that I didn't have cell service, and that there was no such thing as Lyft. So instead I went old school and hailed a taxi. On the drive over, I gawked at the stunted downtown. I forgot how small this place was. Back then, back now, hippie cowboys and slackers still roamed this town freely because they could still afford it. When we arrived at Flipnotics, I handed the driver my credit card.
Sorry, I don't take credit card.
That's fine. I pulled out a 20 and handed it to him.
What in the hell is this?
It's a 20, and that includes a 20% tip, good sir.
No, it's not. It's a counterfeit, and a crappy one, too.
What are you talking about? That's Andrew Jackson. See? His face? Big as life.
Yeah, like way too big.
I had a terrible realization. The $20 bill I handed him was minted in my time. Currency in the 1990s looked different. I had 2 more 20s in my wallet, but they were all new bills. Stuck without functional currency, I chose the most rational option. I opened the door and bolted. With my earpods snug in, I activated the shimmer. The irate taxi driver peeled out to give chase. I bounded over someone's yard and accessed the home button. Pretty Pimpin' started playing, and mercifully, the shimmering enveloped me. When the shimmering dissipated, I emerged surrounded by the walls of my apartment again. My iPhone, connected to the home Wi-Fi, displayed the time and date and showed that I returned to the same moment I left. Despite having spent over an hour in 1996, virtually no time had passed in 2016. There was one casualty. I shouldn't have been sitting down when I shimmered out, because not only did my clothes and iPhone shimmer with me, which they should, but a good portion of the recliner shimmered as well. The base of the chair remained in the present, while the seat was in a parking lot at Terminal Rent-A-Car in 1996. Later, I realized that there were a lot of things that could have gone wrong that didn't. My iPhone was at 25% charge when I shimmered out, and I didn't bother to bring a cord with me. If I had run out of juice in 1996, the appropriate charger wouldn't even exist until well into the 21st century. Along with having currency that looked too different, my credit cards likewise wouldn't be accepted, as the account simply didn't exist yet. Near misses and busted IKEA slacker chair notwithstanding, what I accomplished? It was monumental. 20 years. I had just broken the time barrier and shimmered back 20 years. After achieving something so seismic, it was a bit of a letdown to return to Trollster the following morning. I had just completed the application and loaded it for Conway Energy. I headed into the conference room for an all-hands meeting. Up at the front of the room, my boss introduced 2 men who were consultants hired to determine how best to reimagine the office structure. I had been through a few of these restructurings. It was code for layoffs. After the meeting, I received an email that I would be interviewing with Bill and George on Monday. Trollster got their algorithm from me, and they could replicate the product now going forward. Why keep me around? When I got back to my apartment, I slumped onto the futon. Yesterday, I had broken the time barrier, and today, I faced the prospect that I was probably going to get laid off after being a tool for Trollster, and I had no fallback. I glanced over to the table. The Omni magazine opened to the photo of Christian Vaughn. Apparently, I was going back to 1984 so that I could fail as a science fiction writer too. I was about to slide into an emotional abyss when something occurred to me. Wait a second. He wasn't just a failed writer. He did something big. I jumped out of the futon and flipped back to the beginning of the article. Aha! There it is! Christian Vaughn, an enormously successful venture capitalist. I couldn't believe how I missed that. Of course he was a successful venture capitalist. What better way to be a venture capitalist if you already knew which companies were going to change the world? And you don't become an angel investor in both Apple and Microsoft and not become rich. Christian Vaughn, he had to be rich. Meaning, I had to be rich. And suddenly, for the first time in what felt like years, a grin found its way on my face. In one of those motivational tapes she used to listen to, Mom learned that the Chinese use the same word for crisis as for opportunity, so she made up her own word, crisitunity. I used to roll my eyes whenever she said something corny like, "It's a crisitunity." What I would give to hear her say that now. This was definitely a crisitunity. But if I'm going to be successful, I had better lay out a plan. Because my entire life up to this point has been a cautionary tale of what happens when you wing it. Okay, so it looks like I'm going to shimmer back and use my knowledge of the history of high tech to become a successful venture capitalist so I can profit off the past. Easy. If that's the case, how am I going to bring the money back here? How much could I carry on me? I bet even $1 million is a lot of bulk to strap on. What about $10 million? And then let's just say I do shimmer with all the cash back to the present. How will I explain my sudden turn of fortune to the IRS? Maybe I could open up a savings account in 1984 in my name as Chris Lamb and put it in there. Or I could inherit it. Yes! As Christian Vaughn, I could set up some kind of trust for me as Chris Lamb that would mature around the date that I shimmered out, and it would be there upon my return. But wait, I also will need to publish a science fiction flop and get an interview with Omni in 1984 wearing the McFlyvion.com t-shirt in order for me to discover that I'll be doing this, if that makes any sense. Okay, in other words, this is your typical temporal causality loop. I've seen enough Star Trek to know one when I saw one. There are still a load of questions. Like, what's my starting point? How far back should I shimmer? And why will I pose as this Christian Vaughn in the first place? I googled Christian Vaughn and found a Wikipedia entry. As reported in the Omni article, he and his business partner, Jasmine Bartels, were founders of V&B Capital, and their first investment was $100,000 to Apple Computers. V&B Capital was founded in 1976, which would be close to the limit for me to shimmer, as I was 4 years old back then. Since the Shimmer app relied on nostalgic resonance, I doubted I could go back much earlier. Okay, so why will I choose to go by this alias Christian Vaughn? I searched Ancestry for Christian Vaughn and jackpot! The person was real enough, born February 12th, 1937. That would make me 39 in 1976, which actually would explain why I'm going to use this identity. He was somewhere in the vicinity of my current age. But there was more in the vital records. Christian Vaughn died on October 14, 1943 in a flood. That was sad, but on the plus side, it meant that there was nobody to contest his identity. After gathering what I could on my alias, I moved on to my business partner, Jasmine Bartels. There was significantly more information on her. In 1975, Jasmine was one of the first African American women to graduate from Harvard Law. She did a brief stint as a public defender before becoming a co-founder in V&B Capital. She was noted for her philanthropic work in her hometown of Oakland, to include a non-profit foundation to connect public schools with the latest high-tech equipment. I found an old video that had been uploaded onto YouTube. Jasmine was speaking to a group of high school kids talking about the importance of not being afraid to be different. She told this story about having an imaginary friend when she was a little kid named Moomapapus, who was her advisor to bounce ideas off of. Jasmine died in a car crash in 1998, so I couldn't contact her now to find out how we met. Getting $100,000 to invest in Apple was another problem. As it stood, my current assets consisted of a few thousand in my 401k, a beat-up Toyota Camry, and my mom's vinyl collection. Fortunately, Hollywood gave me an idea. In Back to the Future 2, Biff Tannen took the Gray Sports Almanac, which listed the results of every sporting event from 1950 to 2000, and he gave it to his younger self in 1955. I could pull off a Biff and gamble my way to $100,000. After draining my 401k and my savings, I had a little bit over $8,000 and spent most of it to purchase old currency on eBay. It was a terrible exchange rate, but at least the period-appropriate currency would be accepted, and it would accumulate as I biffed my way through 1976. I bought a large hiking backpack and packed it with the $5,300 I had in period currency, my laptop, and extra charging cables for my phone. I stood outside in the parking lot of my apartment complex with my phone in hand. There was an appointment reminder about the meeting with Bill and George on Monday. I dismissed the reminder with a smirk, because I knew that my fate would not be decided by them. My future lay in the past and what I did next. I tapped on the Shimmer Pro icon, pressed play, and the world around me shimmered as soon as the piano chords began.
Stick around for episode 2 of the 6-part miniseries Smells Like Time Travel, coming up next.
The role of Heidi was played by Annalise Fox. Most of the background music has been provided by Mixkit and Thessalian Studios. The following popular music are as follows: Pretty Pimpin' by Kurt Vile, Flashdance by Irene Cara, I'm Allowed by Buffalo Tom, Gin and Juice by Snoop Dogg, and Welcome Back by John Sebastian.